The first time Lena Montes heard the violinist at Hoyt-Schermerhorn, she thought it was merely a bit of weekday magic, a delicate string of notes hovering over the tang of brake dust and stale pastry smells. She worked in the Metropolitan Transit Authority's cartography unit, a cubicle forest 4 floors above the rails, where she spent her days revising digital schematics of the subway. Because of that, her ear was trained to ignore performers. She'd mapped every busker-allowed mezzanine in the system and had listened to 1,000 permutations of Autumn Leaves. Still, the melody drifting out from behind a marble column held her in place, so crystalline that everything else, the flickering ads, the crush of bodies, seemed to dissolve. She lingered a minute too long, missed her C train, and arrived at work late enough to earn a raised eyebrow from her supervisor. 2 days later, the violinist was stationed on the downtown A platform. The music was almost the same, but now certain notes snagged at Lena's ribcage, as though the composer knew her personally and was teasing loose a thread only she could feel. People around her, construction workers, students, tourists hauling suitcases, unconsciously adjusted their paces to the tune, a collective breath swelling and emptying on invisible cues. When the train arrived and the crowd boarded, Lena saw the violinist's bow freeze on a high harmonic. The notes seemed to scatter like starlings, and half the passengers, Lena included, chose cars they rarely used. She noticed but didn't question her decision. It felt correct, even inevitable, like locking into the groove of a well-oiled gear. That night, reviewing delayed train incident reports, Lena saw something curious. Commuter flow data indicated an inexplicable bulge between 8:17 and 8:31 a.m. on 3 separate lines. Riders had moved in odd arcs through stations, looping from one platform to another before exiting and re-entering fare control. The patterns were invisible to casual observation, but the algorithm flagged them as anomalies. When she overlaid the loops on the master map, her spine prickled. The trajectories, when traced and magnified, formed a near-perfect spiral inside a pentagon, its edges touching 5 transfer hubs: Hoyt-Schermerhorn, Fulton Street, West 4th, Times Square, and Columbus Circle. If you printed the symbol on paper, you'd think it was the purposeful scrawl of an occult architect. She closed the file, certain she was overlaying the wrong dataset. By midnight, she convinced herself she'd made a coding error. Even so, sleep was impossible. The melody replayed inside her skull, whispering that none of this was accidental. The third time, she went looking for the violinist. It was Friday, and a heat wave coated the tunnels in metallic humidity. She left her office an hour early, riding the B down to DeKalb, certain the music would pull her like a lodestar. Sure enough, the first whisper of sound, just a tremolo brushing the humid air, found her before she reached the turnstiles. The performer stood against a tiled wall, eyes half closed, bow drifting like cattail fluff across the strings. His open case overflowed with bills, as though people tossed money only to anchor themselves long enough to keep moving. A tremor rippled through the crowd, shoulders aligning, footfalls synchronizing. Hundreds of strangers rode by the same oar. Lena felt the rhythm tug at her sternum. To test it, she stepped left when the music suggested right. A sharp ache flared behind her eyes, and her feet corrected themselves without permission. Fear sluiced through her, knocking out the curiosity that had brought her there. She fled up the staircase, gasping by the time she reached the street. Only when an ambulance siren blared did the internal music fade. Over the weekend, she researched phenomenon like mass hypnosis, binaural beats, and the legendary Piper of Hamelin. She found references to trance routes in folklore, tales of travelers who marched precise geometries across landscapes when summoned by enchanted music. The motifs reappeared in Mayan glyphs, Nordic runes, and secret societies that believed walking a shape opened doors in the mind or elsewhere. But the subway, with its spaghetti tangle of rails and transfers, provided the first perfect canvas for a maestro with modern ambitions. Sunday night, she printed a large map and highlighted the stations with reported anomalies. A grotesque shape emerged, not just a spiral inside a pentagon, but subsequent days forming new layers, nested concentric sigils like an architect's blueprint for something immense. The rotations radiated outward, annexing fresh junctions. If the trend continued, soon the routes would involve every line south of 125th Street. The city, she thought, was being inscribed without its knowledge. She considered going to the police, but what would she say? A busker is drawing occult glyphs with commuters? Instead, she emailed an old professor, Dr. Arturo Seal, who once lectured on the psychological architecture of public spaces. She attached the maps and asked for perspective. His reply arrived at dawn. I've seen similar patterns in Prague, 1968, and Valparaiso, 1983. Cease involvement immediately. Destruction of the sound source is the only recorded remedy. She reread the message 6 times, then deleted it. Fear clawed her chest, but another emotion coiled beneath: responsibility. If she turned away, she'd still know the symbols were expanding underground, engraving New York with intents nobody had consented to. The notion of all those unwitting pedestrians, their agency hijacked, repulsed her. Monday morning, Lena packed noise-canceling earplugs, tin snips, and a small hammer into her tote bag. She wore sneakers instead of heels. At 7:40, she descended into the Canal Street complex, a station the data suggested would be the next node. Sure enough, a wisp of violin curled through the air, darting between the pillars like a living thing. She shoved the plugs deep into her ears. The world muted to a cotton murmur. Even so, faint traces of the melody seeped in, less sound than a vibration along her jaw. She followed it past surprised commuters who already showed signs of entrainment. Eyes glazed, jaws slack, as they drifted in gentle eddies awaiting musical instructions. The violinist stood at a column near the edge of the uptown platform, posture statuesque despite the riptide of bodies funneling past. Up close, Lena saw he was younger than she'd guessed. Mid-20s, with hair the bruised black of subway tunnels. His expression was serene, as though every pull of the bow polished an inner mirror. The case at his feet lay open, but instead of money, it held a subway map so bespattered with charcoaled lines, it looked like a ritual cloth. She moved to the column behind him and crouched. The plan was simple. Snip the 2 strings still intact, only 2 were producing sound, and smash the bridge for good measure. But as soon as she touched the instrument's shadow, a counter-melody sawed into her skull. A warning note, thin as a scalpel. Her chest tightened. She forced her hands forward. The tin snips clicked on empty air. The violinist had pivoted with impossible speed, bow angled like a rapier at her throat. His eyes, unfocused before, now glittered with sharp cognition. "You shouldn't interfere," he said, voice quiet but resonant, amplified by the hush of mesmerized commuters. Lena ripped one earplug out to hear him better and felt music slam against her senses, a tidal wave of chords weaving command into muscle. Her knees buckled. The bow drifted an inch closer, yet no one else noticed. Every commuter continued gliding in choreographed trances, boarding trains, exiting doors, creating new lines on some invisible etch-a-sketch. "What are you drawing?" Lena rasped. The violinist's smile was gentle, almost pitying. "An aperture. For what?" "For the city," he said. "For all of us. We've choked this island with random movement, noise, chaos. I'm realigning it. When the pattern completes, life above and below will synchronize. No more accidents of desire, only flow." She pictured it. Millions walking loops prescribed by a single score, their decisions no longer their own. That isn't harmony. That's slavery. He shrugged, raised his bow, and unleashed a flourish so exquisite, tears sprang to her eyes. The crowd surged. A train screeched in, doors opened, bodies poured inside, all to the cadence he supplied. Lena's free arm shot out, gripping a girder to anchor herself. The metal vibrated with the music, and in the vibrations she sensed the deeper architecture. Each note corresponded to switch positions, signal lights, attainable walking speeds, elevator cycles. The song wasn't just audible, it was coded, synchronized to the MTA's living heart. She did the desperate thing, yanked out her remaining earplug, allowing the full roar inside. Immediately commands assaulted her: step forward, join, traverse, align. But instead of obeying, she concentrated on the map, forever stamped onto her professional brain. Track numbers, service changes, closed passageways. She visualized an old disused segment connecting Canal to the Broadway Lafayette mezzanine, a corridor sealed after the '77 blackout. The melody urged her northward on open platforms, but she pictured the dead hallway instead, embraced it like a talisman of entropy. The commands faltered, confused. Sweat soaked her blouse, but she found herself free enough to stagger sideways. The violinist's eyes narrowed. Dissonance had entered his perfect chord. He modulated, layering a new phrase designed to crush dissent. Somewhere, a toddler screamed, then went silent as harmony reclaimed him. Lena stumbled beneath the sound, but reached the edge of the platform. She crouched, craning to find the power conduit feeding the tunnel lights. With a hammer, she smashed the metal grating that shielded the conduit. Sparks leapt. A light strip died. A gasp tremored through the trance walkers. Infinitesimal, but real. Discord. Electricity, she realized through the thundering music, was part of the score. Sensors in the tunnel relayed real-time passenger density. Each change fed back into his composition through earpiece monitors she now noticed looped behind his hair. Disrupt the sensors, disrupt the feedback, disrupt the song. She crawled like an animal along the platform edge, hammering conduit after conduit. Bulbs extinguished, plunging sections into gloom. Each burst of sparks produced a squeal from the violin as the musician recalibrated, his serenity cracking. Finally he snapped, bow slashing in a savage arpeggio whose keening pitch bent the air. Glass shattered in nearby ad boxes. Commuters halted mid-step, faces contorted. Lena's hammer dropped from her trembling fingers. She had only one tool left, the map inside her head. She screamed station names in random order, aloud and inside her psyche. Van Secklin, Rockaway Boulevard, 96th Street, 2nd Avenue. Each invocation summoned mental images of complex junctions where the pattern couldn't exist because service changes were tearing up tracks. The geography of chaos. She hurled those memories against the melody the way boulders might be rolled in front of advancing soldiers. The violin shrieked, detuned by psychic disharmony. Its E string snapped, curling like a dead insect. An ordinary busker might have stopped. This one switched tactics, pivoting to pizzicato, plucking the remaining strings with blistering speed. The resulting staccato carved straight through her mental barricades. Blood drummed in her ears. She felt herself rise, prepared to march anew. A single command repeated, Union Square. She pictured escalators, the wide mezzanine. The pattern would be redrawn there. She couldn't let him relocate. Summoning last reservoirs of will, she dove. Not at him, that was impossible, but at the open violin case. Her fingers clutched its edges, flipping it over. The subway map, covered in charcoal marks, fluttered out like a wounded bird. She crushed it in her fist and flung the wad onto the tracks, just as a Q train thundered past. Paper vanished beneath steel. The effect was instantaneous. The pizzicato faltered. The notes lost their algorithmic precision and became human again. Imperfect, filled with accidental vibrato. Commuters blinked as though awaking from heavy dreams, their strides faltering. A woman dropped her phone, looking horrified to discover she'd been clutching it like a talisman. A teenager stared at his own shaking hands. The violinist looked genuinely afraid for the first time. He tried to conjure a new phrase, but without the map's geometry, the melody lacked coordinates. It wobbled, a compass needle near a magnet. Lena, still hearing phantoms of music, seized the moment. She snatched her hammer and brought it down on the violin's spruce belly. The wood cracked with a wet pop. Sound died like a candle snuffed by wind. Silence swallowed the platform. No one spoke for a full 5 seconds. The commuters, free yet confused, froze in postures that looked choreographed only moments before. Then the inevitable surge of New York reaction filled the vacuum. Curses, questions, cell phone recordings. Someone asked if a performance art piece had just ended. Another demanded a refund for being late to work. Police arrived, tipped off by panicked calls. They found a smashed instrument, a dazed musician, and a transit employee with bleeding knuckles. Lena expected arrest, but instead the violinist was cuffed. Multiple witnesses reported feeling coerced, describing the experience as like being remote-controlled. One man added that the violinist looked disappointed that we didn't do more. The officers, baffled, hauled him away. At headquarters, Lena gave a statement stripped of occult speculation. She described unusual music overriding commuter judgment and her attempt to stop it. Her supervisor vouched for her character. The NYPD logged the incident as unlawful coercion via unknown means. The violinist, identified as Aleksandar Markovich, carried no ID beyond a Bulgarian passport and a flash drive containing audio compositions titled Aperture IV. When questioned, he spoke in aphorisms. Cities are organs, we must tune them. Psych evaluators diagnosed him with delusional architect syndrome. A judge ordered psychiatric observation. Within 48 hours, Markovich was found catatonic in his cell, fingers rhythmically twitching as if playing a phantom instrument. He'd spoken no word since the arrest. The MTA installed new regulations limiting amplified music on platforms and began replacing sensor arrays Markovich might have hacked. Lena was promoted to lead a task force on anomalous passenger flow. Yet odd blips persisted. Weeks later, tiny swirls appeared in ridership data. Nothing dramatic, just etched curls between Brooklyn's eastern stations. The shape resembled a seed unfolding. Each time Lena saw them, her heart hammered. She personally inspected the stations, finding no performers, no music. Only the usual metallic air. Maybe they were residual echoes, she told herself. But sometimes, standing on a late-night platform, she sensed a chord thrumming subterranean miles away, like whale song through bedrock. One October evening, Dr. Seal visited her office. He looked weary, a traveler too long on roads nobody charted. He examined the fresh anomalies and sighed. The aperture wasn't destroyed, he said, merely delayed. Symbols, once gestated, seek completion. I crushed the map, shattered his violin. Lena protested. Maps can be redrawn, instruments replaced. The real blueprint is etched in us now. Those who heard the full melody carry fragments. He placed a metronome on her desk and set it ticking. Your heart rate matches 72 BPM, the pulse Markovich favored. Be vigilant. After he left, Lena watched rush-hour dots swirl across her monitor, each representing a human being, each with private urgencies. Dinner plans, job interviews, clandestine love affairs. They curved along rails she'd spent years refining, turning transfer points into living arteries. She zoomed out until the whole network glowed on screen. For a second, the lines appeared to vibrate, threads on a cosmic loom. She felt the old pull, a whisper of harmony promising relief from randomness. Walk, align, become part of something vast. She flipped off the monitor, plunging the room into reflection-warped darkness. Then she opened her desk drawer, removed a pair of earplugs, and slid them in. Above and below, the city continued its restless song, but for now her own silence was enough to hold the aperture at bay.